Okay, welcome back. This is beginning of a new season. This is winter. This is the toughest of all the seasons that the Ojibwe had to face. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this because this is going to be pretty interesting. Snow filled the world, falling deeper and deeper, changing the island. The cabin was made in the Shamukaman way. Dede was proud of its snug construction, with thick logs fitted together as closely as possible. The heaviest mud he could find, the stickiest clay, Dede tamped between the logs to seal the cracks. He put crossbeams up top and split logs to make a tiny loft where Omachias, Angeline, and Pinch slept in their woven reed mats placed over tufts of moss. Grandma still slept in the coldest end of the loft, only now in her thick rabbit fur blanket. Cold crept along the floor. Omachias was glad of the boring time she'd spent over the summer pressing fistfuls of gumbo clay taken from the center of the island into those places where the dried mud had crumbled. The warmest places in the house were on the sides where she had mended best. Cold air sneaked in just where she'd run out of muck and had to use grass. Sometimes the wind whistled when it entered. The thin whine sent a shiver down her back. Now that Dede was home, the cabin changed. The cabin changed too, filled with his traps and blankets, the big man's coat and head wrap, his moose hide mitts and traveling kettles, ice chisels, axe, his moccasins, old again within Mama's embrace, and his new gun secure on pegs over the door. The cabin seemed smaller, cozier, in a way more interesting, Matthias thought. And more difficult, too. People stopped at any time of day or even in the deep of night, and these visitors required constant attention. Yellow Kettle and Grandma were known as the keepers of a good store of food and a warm fire, although Omachias, Angeline, and Pinch were the ones responsible for hauling the water for tea and chopping the wood for the fire that burned in the proud little hearth. The fires needed constant vigilance, as did family needs. Dede's gun required his concentrated care, and he liked tea at his elbow when he cleaned the workings and barrel. It seemed to Omachias that every time the grown-ups began to talk, they discussed travel routes west. They argued whether the pressure of so many newcomers was going to send them the way so many others were sent, into the territory of the Boagnung, also known as the Dakota. There was now constant talk of government intentions, plans to meet in council, invitations to smoke the pipe. At least there was less serious visitors, including Two-Strike Girl, Wish Cobb and Auntie Muskrat, Twilight and Little Bee. Angeline's favorite friend, young Ten Snow, came by to visit almost every day, and Albert Lepatre came early to tell his dreams to Dede, who tried to take them seriously. So here we got, this time, the Ojibwe are concerned about the Europeans, the white men, taking their lands and pushing them out of their land into the land of their enemy, the Dakota. Last night I dreamed I got my head stuck in a kettle, he revealed. This is Lepatre talking to Dede, his voice low and grumbled. It must have been a very big kettle, Dede said solemnly, for Lepatre had a big round head and a full moon face. Geget, said Lepatre. He never understood teasing jokes. It was big. Even so, what does it mean? Some dreams are so powerful that they are beyond our humble ability to comprehend, said Dede. Lepatre leaned back, satisfied. Only Mama caught Dede's wink. Even old Tallow stopped by to eat whatever she was given, often standing outside the door and bolting soup before she hurried off to hunt. And yes, she now had donned her coat. This is her famous coat that she wore in the winter. The coat of old tallow was a fantastic thing, woven of various pelts, including one of lynx, one of beaver, a deer hide, and two that belonged to beloved dogs. She had pieced together old blankets, one of faded red, one brown, discarded shreds of unidentifiable stuffs were sewed patch on patch, including some black beaded velvets and bright calicos. The coat fit across her in a great mound and flapped when she moved. She wore it well, springing lightly along like a huge, tattered bear. No cold seemed to bother old Tallow, but if it was too biting a day to walk outside or to slide on the ice, Ten Snow and Angeline sat in the corner of the cabin on bedrolls and piles of skins. There, light from the window of thick oiled paper falling golden on their faces, the two young women sewed and talked. Ten Snow had finished something very impressive, much admired by the other women, including Grandma, who took it in her hands and blessed it one cold day. It was a bag for fishtail, a fashionable bandolier bag instead of the dyed quills Grandma used so skillfully. Ten Snow had sewn the bag with trade beads bought in precious. Again, there's her coat and two of her dogs. Grandma used so skillfully, Ten Snow had sewn the bag with trade beads bought in precious packets at the company store. The bag was covered with 4 beaver skins worth of white beads. They were expensive. So the company store is a fur trade store. Fur trading companies like the Northwest Fur Trading Company or American Fur Trading Company would set up stores where the Native Americans would come in and exchange their beaver pelts. Native Americans killed the beaver, and they came to these stores where they traded the beaver for manufactured goods like guns, ammunition, beads, cloth, metal pans, knives, sewing needles, tobacco, all cool things that they couldn't get for themselves. They needed to trade for, and they traded beaver skins for them. Fishtail's square bag was beaded all over in swirls of green vines, leaves, and glowing crimson flowers that popped out vividly against the white beads of the background. The shoulder strap, too, was entirely beaded. The strap's design was simple, unusual, and consisted of blue curls that Ten Snow bashfully explained were the uncoiled heads of new spring ferns, her husband's favorite food. Looking at it, Omachias had to blink her eyes, for the beads were so perfect and their repeated pattern so compelling that the ferns seemed to move like little waves. "Will you teach me how to bead that pattern?" Angeline asked her friend. "Aye." Ten Snow removed from her little sewing kit a needle, and Angeline took out her own work, her own beads, and bought with dried whitefish. They began. "Goeneen." Gay neen, said Omachias. "Me too." Ten Snow smiled gently, and Angeline looked at her little sister in surprise. "You?" she grinned. "Little frog, little jumper? Can you sit still that long?" Stung by her sister's amused tone of voice, Omachias dropped her head to her chest, eyes squinting narrow. A huge space opened up in her head, black and rushing as a freezing winter stream. She was old enough to tan the stinking old hides, wasn't she? Her work was valued there, wasn't it? Why shouldn't she be trusted to use the precious beads? She was 8 winters now. She wasn't that little. She could chop wood, haul the water from the hole Nokomis kept open in the ice with an axe, and a long, sharp pole. Why couldn't she bead like the older girls? Angeline laughed out loud. Machias turned away. Her heart shrunk cold in her chest, tiny but heavy as a little rock. How her sister's words could stab her sometimes. But now, I lost my place. But now, as though she hadn't noticed Angeline's remark at all, Ten Snow's hand was stroking Omachias' arm and she was speaking. Shh, Ishti, little sister, I made something for you. Into Omachias' hand she placed a small leather packet. Omachias looked up at Ten Snow, uncertain. Yes, for you. Ten Snow gestured for her to open it, and slowly, with unbelieving delight, Omachias did. The leather packet was lined with broadcloth, and into the cloth 2 needles were struck. 2! Around a peeled twig, Ten Snow had wound a long length of the finest sinew thread to use in beaded clothing. And into where the leather packet was lined with broadcloth, and into the cloth 2 needles were struck. 2! Around a peeled twig, Ten Snow had wound a long length of the finest sinew thread to use in beading. At the end of the cloth, a small pocket held a lump of fragrant, summery yellow beeswax to use in straightening the sinew thread. And best of all, she saw as Ten Snow lifted up the dark blue strip of cloth, there was a tiny sack of colors, of beads, seed beads, the little grown-up kind of beads, shining and gleaming against the cloth. Mane Domines, they were called, little spirit seeds. Megwitch, Megwitch, Megwitch. Omachias thanked Ten Snow over and over again until the older girl couldn't help smiling. The youngest of her family, Ten Snow had no little sisters and yet no children, so she was extra kind to Omachias. As the older girls returned to their work and their talk, Omachias curled near the fire to look at her beads and to imagine what she would make with them. At first she thought that she might bead some tiny moccasins for her dolls. Then she thought Angeline might make fun of her project. Mama, searching for Mama. She had so many quilled things and preferred them. Besides, Grandma was always making a box or an ornament for her. How about for Grandma, for Day, for Angeline? Certainly not for Pinch, who would spoil anything he got, or Niwu, who might chew off the beads. Niwu, suddenly she knew, as though the beads told her themselves, that they were meant for her little brother. Omachias would make something very special for him. She saw what she would make coming clear. Moccasins, warm moccasins, trimmed with rabbit fur. In her mind, she planned them out, sewn from scraps of moose hide that were left over from the summer. She saw them with white flowers beaded on the ankles, woolen balls of blanket thread to decorate the cuffs. Admiring her idea, gloating and planning, Omachias turned the leather sewing kit and the bead packet over and over in her hands. Mama and Grandma set their work out on blankets before them. Grandma was completing the edge of a great round box of birch bark, and one that she would use to store her red willow kinnikinnick. She was binding the edge with straps of basswood bark and sinew. She had cut fancy shapes of stars out to sew on the sides. Mama had set aside Day-Day's fancy moosehide coat in order to finish Angeline's fine clothing to wear at the gathering dance that would be held as soon as a few more families had set up their winter households. Grandma, meanwhile, had finished a beautiful dance fan made of a partridge tail. Its handle was birch bark, bound tightly, quilled with sweet flowers. The thimbles that Mama was sewing into Angeline's shawl caught orange sparks of fire as Mama worked each one onto the wide strip of ribbon. First, she punched a little hole in the tip of the thimble with her awl, and then she threaded a little bit of red cord through. Knotted the end well inside the thimble and sewed the end of the cord underneath the ribbon so it didn't show. As soon as she took the last stitch, Angeline clapped her hands. So it sounds to me like they're doing some activities here. These are all wintertime activities. Things that they're doing inside because it's too cold to be outside. Let me try it on, cried Angeline impatiently. Laughing, Mama handed it to her, and beautiful Angeline wrapped herself in its fine swirl. Grandma handed her the dance fan. Everyone admired. Mama, said Omachias, can you help me now? Aye. Yeah, get, Mama said. They left off looking at Angeline and started work on Niwu's moccasins. From the moose hide left over from Day-Day's moccasins. Mama helped Omachias cut out a pair of moccasins for Niwu, winter moccasins with cuffs well up his legs for warmth. Omachias planned out a flower and began immediately imitating Mama to sew the beads into the design. It was harder, more exacting work than she thought. The sinew tangled and knotted, and beads bound off the needle's tip. Even when she fastened the beads on, sometimes they looked odd or crooked, and she had to take them off. She put her needle down. Tears of frustration stung. Don't give up. It was Angeline, her voice gentle and kind. You're doing very well. Nishmay, little sister. Omachias looked at her big sister in surprise, and then gratitude. Nothing felt as good as this unexpected kindness from Angeline. She wiped her tears away and took up her beadwork again. Niwu was napping in his little blanket hammock just above them. Day-Day had tied 2 ropes into holes in the wooden beams, and between the 2 he'd fastened a warm blanket into a hammock. Mama could rock Niwu by moving her foot tied to one of the ropes, or Omachias could swing him by moving the other end of a rope. Again, boys and girls, please write down the activities we're reading about here in this winter time of year. Write them down in your journal. So the sky darkened. Pinch was sent out to bring wood. Another activity. Don't forget, you can always pause this video and write it down and start it up again. He made a face at Omachias, for with her beadwork, she was set apart, another of the women. And Pinch was left to fetch wood all by himself. Day-Day and Fishtail sat in the corner, talking low and thoughtfully, drinking Grandma's tea. Soon they got up and left, for they had decided to try their luck with the fishing nets let down through the big holes chopped in the ice. They went out the door, talking louder the minute they were outside. There was a little space of quiet around the women. Altogether, the time seemed just right for Nokomis. The time seemed just right to ask Nokomis for a story. Ween Damawashin, Daga, Nokomis, Omachias asked, which means tell me a story. What story do you want to hear? Wendigo, said Pinch, returning his arms stacked with woods. Are you sure you want to hear it? Nokomis growled deep in her chest, showed her sharp teeth. Awa! Pinch's eyes rounded, but his grin was full of excitement. He inched closer to Nokomis and tried to shush baby Niwu, who had wakened. Niwu could wiggle out of his cradle board now and at last, and was learning to walk. He pulled himself along by grasping shoulders, clothes, hair, anything to keep upright. When eventually he plumped down, he showed his pleasure by trying to bang his stick doll to pieces against the side of the hearth. "Gago," Omikaya said, but her voice was gentle as she showed Niwu how to dance the doll instead of break it. "Pinch!" From outside, the men were calling him, the big men. He clattered down the wood, jumped to his feet, and ran out the door. Being called by the men was better than a story, even a Wendigo story, any old day. Once again, the women and Niwu were left alone. "Now," Nakoma said, "I can tell you an old story about my grandmother." She looked tellingly at Mama. "You know the one." "Gaget," said Mama, only half teasingly. "Do you think they're old enough to hear it?" "Oh, I was 8 winters old when it happened," said Grandma. "Same as Omikaya's now." "Well, then tell it," Omikaya begged. "Yes, tell it," said Angeline. Ten Snow put down her work for a moment to beg, laughingly along with everyone else. So this is Grandma's story, Fishing the Dark Side of the Lake. Now again, this is a story that's being told. This is told to teach people a lesson. Let's see if we can maybe try to figure out what this story is being told for. What's the lesson to be learned from hearing the story? See if you can figure it out. "So when I was a little girl," said Nokomis, her voice lilting high and dropping low, her voice far away, "I was told by my grandfather, who I lived with, who raised me, never to fish the dark side of the lake." So what would be the dark side of the lake? Well, that would be the deeper side, or deepest side. Why, you wonder? I never knew that either. Never found out. Of course, being a young girl and very curious, I took my grandfather's canoe out one day while he was sleeping. I put my fishing spear and nets in the canoe, and I would fish where the water was deepest, strangest, bluest on clear days, and blackest on the cloudy days. That's where I paddled. I had a stick and a line, and I let that down, baited, and waited to see what sort of fish I would catch. The wait was long, my grandchildren, and as I fished there, I grew uneasy. I remembered my grandfather's warnings, the way he insisted that I never approach this deep water. I had seen him looking out there, sometimes at sunset, his eyes sad and clear. Sometimes he mentioned my grandmother. She had gone away young, I knew that. Not much more. Her favorite food, he said, was fresh plums. She could stand beneath a plum tree and eat all day, he said. When he said that, he smiled. Fresh wild plums. I had taken dark red plums with me, and as I sat in the boat waiting for the fish to bite, I put them slowly, one by one, in my mouth. What was wrong with this side of the lake? I had to wonder. Except for the depth and the darkness, it wasn't much different. I could find out what was different, I decided. I kept my line in the water. So my bait must have been wrong, though. My bait must have been no good. I didn't get a bite. Even a little nibble. Maybe, I thought, Grandfather told me not to fish this dark side of the lake because there's no fish that lived here. That would be a joke on me. Just then, I looked over the side of the boat and I spilled all the rest of my plums into the water. Oh, I was disgusted. Down they went to the bottom. Not long after they sank from sight, though, I had a strong tug in my line. Then, not just a tug, a real pull. Soon I was struggling to keep from being dragged overboard. I had caught something huge. Dun, dun, dun. A hand reached out of the water, pulled itself up my fishing line, finger over finger, fist over fist, until suddenly the beautiful face of a woman appeared. She looked up at me and kept climbing. "Do you have more plums?" she asked. I said no, but I helped her into the boat anyway. Her hair was black and endlessly long, covering her, and underneath it, she was naked. Her smile was gentle. Her skin was purple, gray, cold, the color of those plums. There was something familiar about her, something awful and yet familiar. And I was very much afraid and began to paddle quickly back to grandfather. And still, I was a curious child. "Who are you?" I asked as we traveled along. "Well, I'm your grandmother," she said. "Here's what happened. Long ago, I married your grandfather. We could not be parted. We were like one person, he and I. He was stingy with me. After I bore our first child and lay her in his arms, after she grew for a year, I became my daring self again. I became again the wild girl he'd loved from the beginning. One night, I dared him to swim with me in the lake. We went out in our canoe to the deepest part of the lake, the darkest and the coldest side, where you have found me. We threw off our clothes. I dived in deep as I pulled my, I dived in deep as I could, pulled my way down until I reached the bottom. My dear grandchild, that's where I got lost. It was so dark at the bottom that I got turned around. I could not find my way back up again. And so tired, I curled up in the cold weeds and went to sleep. Until now. My grandmother looked towards the shore. Her face glowed in the twilight. I saw as we approached that she was watching my grandfather as he came down the path from the camp to the edge of the lake. He walked closer, closer. Something strange happened. I rubbed my eyes. I passed my hand across my face. I could not believe what I was seeing. As he approached, my grandfather's step seemed to pick up life. His hair got darker and darker until it turned the pure black of his youth. Lines disappeared from his face. He straightened his bowed back just as our canoe touched the shore. He smiled, and oh, my grandchildren, suddenly he had all his teeth. I got out of the canoe, and he looked upon me kindly and said goodbye to me. Then he took my place in the canoe with his young wife, and the two gazed into each other's face with great happiness. I watched the two paddle away together into the darkness, into the night. 2 shooting stars passed over through the sky. The lake was silent. I never again saw my grandfather, but eventually his clothing was found on the shore, washed up on the dark side of the lake. So what is this story supposed to teach them about? When the Nokomis finished, no word was spoken. Omachias could say nothing because stiff hairs pricked at the back of her neck. She couldn't get the sight of that hand reaching out of the water from her mind. Ten Snow and Angeline were wiping tears from their eyes. Mama sighed and continued her work, slowly, carefully on Angeline's shawl. Perhaps she was thinking of the big gathering where Angeline might meet someone and go away with him, far from her mother's gaze. Although she didn't want that to happen, it was inevitable, and Yellow Kettle's fond look said all that was in her heart. How deeply she loved her children, how dear they were to her, the center of her life, being naturally cheerful and bold. Though she soon grinned and joked, Yellow Kettle could not help turning the mood her way, and soon everyone was laughing over Niwu's tumbling and Andeg's playful squawks as Niwu followed him, grabbed for him. Andeg knew how to stay just out of reach of those chubby, curious fingers. So, we learn a story. And we learned about some activities that they did during the cold parts of winter. Please make sure you have this stuff written down. We'll see you in the next chapter.